okay? When I would teach this class at health retreats that I work at, usually the responses that I would get were, yeah, there's just not enough time in my day. All my energy is going to taking care of other people or running a company. So family needs, work needs might have come into play. Other obstacles might be lack of motivation. I'm just not feeling it. It's another to-do that I don't really want to prioritize right now. Maybe another obstacle might be I don't even know where to start. Life transition, okay? I see this with empty nesters, retirees, loss of a loved one, where moving, changing jobs, where there's just change. And so our energy gets diverted to that change, right? So the pandemic is one of those changes, right? And then our self-care goes down that priority list. Social, who we living with? Who are we hanging out with? What are their choices? That's going to impact our self-care as well. And then lastly, it becomes, if we're not used to prioritizing our self-care, then it may become a new skill set that we actually need to create, okay? These are the selfless caregivers. I love this meme by artist Ann Tainter. Why? I'd be delighted to put my needs last again, So it becomes this sense of it might be how we're programmed to put other people and their needs first always. But that comes at a high, high cost to our own health and well-being if we're continuing to give from an empty cup. The mindset becomes, it's either my care or yours rather than mine and you. Okay, we want to get out of that either or mindset. And the work that I've done over the years with folks, that saying, you can't give from an empty vessel? That's not true. I've worked with many people where they give wonderfully to other people from a place of being empty. But this is the thing. There's an expiration date to that. Something's got to give. And sooner than later, and sometimes later than sooner, but at some point, when we give from an empty vessel on a chronic basis, it comes at a high, high cost to our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. And so unfortunately, you might get a wake-up call of like, whoa, okay, wow, this, my health is really suffering. My mental health is suffering. Something needs to change. And so this is where we want to rewire our thinking and think, self-care is not selfish. It's an act of self-respect. It's an act of self-regard. So when we're in this place of we're thinking self-care is selfish, and this is probably the number one thing that I'll hear from those who aren't used to putting their needs first. Again, their thinking is, if I put my needs first, someone else's needs will suffer. But selfishness is more of an excessive concern for self, okay, without regard for others. Selfness is different. Selfness is about stepping into this place of replenishment. It's about tuning into, well, what do I need? How can I best show up for myself? It's like putting that, when we're on an airplane, they say that you need to put your oxygen mask on first so that you can show up for the person next to you and help them, and so that you don't, not be morbid, but die. You need to have your oxygen mask on. Self-care, it's not a luxury. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. And especially now, and especially if we're in roles in which we're giving, we want to make sure that we're filling up our own cup, or else that will come at a cost if we don't. So what I want to do now is I'm going to dive into some ways in which we can replenish and restore those resources. But before I do that, are there any questions that are popping up right now as far as anything that, maybe any other obstacles that might be getting in the way of prioritizing your self-care?
So Erin, we have one already, and this is from Linda. And she says, what to do if your workplace culture does not acknowledge self-care, but does have an EAP, or employee assistance program, provide help and web sessions?
Okay, first of all, it's great that they have an EAP. What's frustrating is when an organization doesn't foster employee wellness. I feel ya. It's important to certainly have that. It really works from the top down, but at least there's an EAP. So with EAPs, what's wonderful is it allows for affordable solution-focused counseling. And so I would say start there. You're going to have an ally on your side right away who can help you individually in walking through this as far as navigating this process of trying to prioritize it. So the fact that they have an EAP is fantastic. That's better than nothing. And I would say use that resource. You'll have your coach, your counselor, your person on your side to kind of help you navigate what might feel very overwhelming. And also they can provide some insight on how to create some work-life balance as well if needed. So very good question. Any other questions? No other questions?
I do have one more. So
okay.
Georgette says she's having trouble mentally transitioning to the new season. So feeling a little stuck and noticing not enough organic transition between workday, evening, and weekend.
Okay. Well, I think this next section of the talk might help with that. And so when you think about the transitions, right, and that's a transition. Our days are getting shorter. For some of us, the weather's getting cooler. Maybe that might have an impact on some of those routines and things that we'd like to do for self-care. It's requiring an adjustment and an adaptability. So as I go into this next part of the talk, I think that might help with kind of doing this and then asking the question of, okay, well, there's change happening, and how can I actually begin to start small and bring in some ways in which I can begin to implement self-care in a way that feels manageable and doable. I find often the most common mindset trap that people fall into is all or nothing. So either they're all in or all out, all good or all bad, you know. So when transition is in play, we want to make sure that we're not expecting too much too soon, that we're dipping our toe in that pool so that we can move that needle rather than feeling like we need to be so perfect within our efforts. So this next part of the talk should hopefully help further answer that particular question. Okay.
And Erin, there was just, this might tie into what you're going to talk about as well, but Miriam put it that many of us are going through a time famine. How do we manage self-care with lack of childcare, school, adult care, elder care as well?
Absolutely. Well said. I have not heard that saying. I love it. I'm going to steal it. Time famine. Yeah, and so this is where something will be better than nothing. So again, in the next part of my talk, it won't be able to be the norm, maybe what we're used to be able to do as far as having that time. Some kids are at home, and then if we're to have the kids at home, and some of us are allocating energy into trying to do the job, and then maybe caring for parents and loved ones. And so time for self becomes like a wish and a dream and a hope rather than a reality. But this is where we're going to need to actually create those pockets. Again, although things have shifted and changed, we want to be able to be creative in our thinking around how can I glean some time for myself and covet that and really protect it. And this is where something will be better than nothing, and actually creating that time. And this is the next part will actually help to kind of hopefully help you to explore where to begin with that, because we might feel like I don't even know where to start. There's only so much time in the day, but good question, and hopefully the next part will help to further answer that question as well. Any others before I move on?
I think you're good to go, Erin. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, good questions. So in this stepping into selfness, right, with our own stuff that's percolating, let alone the new stuff with the new norm and the changes, in order to understand what we need, we have to be still. We need to take a time out and tune in and ask the questions. And I use this phrase of stepping into selfness because it is absolutely a process. Okay, it is a process. It's an easing in process. And often what I find is, and this might piggyback on the question that was just asked, okay, and the first step in actually being able to realign with our self-care is probably creating some boundaries in our life, okay, depending on who's in our world, who we live with, who's pulling at us, right, and where our energy is going. Sometimes we need to be able to create boundaries with other people, and sometimes we need to be able to create our own self boundaries. Maybe we keep relinquishing those because we're used to it, or maybe people just kind of do this because they're used to you know, not having any. And so there's this quote by Brene Brown, and if anyone knows my work, I am always quoting her. I love her work, but she has a phrase called "choose discomfort over resentment." So in this process of creating boundaries and creating this space for allowing time for some self-care, we may need to say no sometimes. We may need to carve out that time where it might actually impact someone else's time that they would normally have with you, okay? And this is a biggie. And so the key with choosing discomfort over resentment is really about, can we choose the discomfort of putting our needs first, or of saying no in that moment, instead of resenting the yes later? Now, this is easier said than done. I want to normalize that, especially for used to just giving, and or if we feel like it's being selfish. Okay, but going back to like something's got to give. In time, it has a huge impact on our health if we keep giving from an empty vessel. Okay. So boundary setting will be key from the get-go, as far as thinking about what are those pockets, those ways in which you can take some of that space back. This will take some sitting with that. Only you know your circumstances, and they may only be 5-minute pockets at a time, okay? But that's better than nothing. And there might be some element of having to disappoint, or and creating boundaries with others. Some people might not love it right out of the gate, okay, is what I'm trying to say. But if you phrase it this way, you may be a boss, it may be a loved one. If you can phrase it this way, like, you know what, I really need your help. Can you help me with something? If we come at it from that way, often I find is that person tends to melt, tends to perk up and go, how can I help this person? Rather than, hey, you know what, you're doing this, or I need you to do this. That's a whole different way. So starting with the discomfort over the resentment, thinking about those pockets, how to language it with those in our lives, how to feel that discomfort within self, and then still make that time for yourself anyway, and creating that boundary. So it's creating the boundaries. And then the next question to ask yourself is, what nourishes you? What nourishes you from the inside out, not just the outside in, but from the inside out? One of the areas of expertise that I have is working with those with emotional and binge eating, where food is the way in which to self-soothe and comfort. And let me tell you, in the last 6 months, we've all need a lot of self-soothing and comforting. And how we've gone about doing it depends on the person. But when you think about what nourishes you, you know, if we've gone to those I call them the false fixes, where it takes the edge off in the moment, but we may have the aftermath of, oh gosh, what did I just consume or do or not do? We want to be able to take 5 and not be so hard on ourselves. In its own way, it's been even if it's in a way that wasn't so good for our health, it's been an active self-care in that moment to relieve some suffering in that moment. So here it becomes, okay, what truly nourishes me? For example, maybe it's coveting that good night's sleep, or it's getting out and getting some exercise and walking. Maybe it's that social connection, because that's with physical distancing, there's been some social distancing too. Maybe I need to bring that in and make sure I'm getting some connections. Eating well. Maybe my eating patterns have gone to chaotic eating, not eating much during the day and eating its gangbusters at night. It's the most common pattern I hear about. Maybe it's, okay, I'm going to start getting in a healthy, nourishing breakfast. Okay, so it's spending a time in the morning that it can set the tone for your day. Meditation, going for a morning walk, coffee, journaling. That's my go-to every morning. Is journaling and a cup of coffee and maybe some reading, and that just really sets the stage. So the question is to ask yourself, what nourishes you? Do you know? If it hasn't been a while since you've actually taken some time to implement that, and if you have no idea, start with what you used to do and see if you can't bring that back in. little by little, not at the same degree or level that you were before, but just a little bit. If we feel like, for example, if you're exercising an hour a day and you haven't been doing anything, then don't expect to get back to an hour a day, but can you carve out maybe 10 minutes of a walk in the morning or in the evening? So start small. If you still got nothing, you're like, I don't know what nourishes me anymore. I've been in survival mode for so long. Ask yourself, what invites calm? What does this and this? Okay. For me, it's being in nature, always being in nature. Maybe it's talking with a trusted friend. Maybe it's sitting with a pet. There's no right or wrong. It's about what nourishes and nurtures and calms you. I find that if we can focus on being additive, instead of focusing on what we feel like we shouldn't be doing or what we should be doing, it's like, what do I want to do? What do I like to do? What feels good for me? What calms me down and centers me? Okay, that could be another question to ask yourself. What brings you joy? What is that? You know, sometimes if we're in this survival mode and we're just trying to get through, we may have stepped away from what brings us pleasure. And a lot of the work that I'm doing with clients right now, this has actually been popping up as far as, wow, I've gotten away from what feels fun, what feels enjoyable. Remember, those social gatherings, maybe that's been a huge source of fun for folks. That's, for many of us, gone by the wayside, although we're getting back into it a little bit. But really, it's like, I love this picture of this little kid because it's like a belly laugh, you know, and have you had one lately? You know, what makes you laugh? What makes you smile? Who makes you smile? Maybe it's a favorite TV show. Again, maybe it's a pet that just makes you smile. Where's your sense of fun? Some of us, it's our sense of play. You know, I recently moved back to my home state of Colorado, and what makes me grin from ear to ear is mountain biking. You know, it just brings me such joy and pleasure, and so I've been able to kind of get back into that, which has been a nice gift. So, what nourishes you from the inside out? What brings you joy? What invites calm? Okay, these are the questions of self-exploration that I encourage you to start with. You may not have the answer right away, okay? You may not, but this is the thing. We need to take the time to ask and to create that stillness in that space so that those answers can come in, so that we can think, oh yeah, I used to do that. I want to do more of that. Or if it's, yeah, I got nothing, then it becomes a place of exploration and experimenting. We want to start small. I can't emphasize that enough. If we feel like we have to take it all on, especially now, we're not going to do it. So with that in mind, okay, there's a phrase I use called non-negotiables, like our daily essentials within our world and our ritual of self-care. Going back to that example of exercising for an hour, well, maybe we need to pare it down to 15 minutes. Can we start small and build in? Exercising 30 minutes of a day, by the way, reduces anxiety by 47% on average. 47%. It decreases our depression if we're experiencing it by up to 32%. When we feel better, we make better self-care choices. So we don't want to underestimate, and this is not rigorous exercise, this is walking, movement. Maybe we need to start with some meditation if that speaks to you. 5 to 10 minutes a day actually creates changes in the brain that create centering and calming. And one of the classes in this wellness series, we're going to have Lizette Safaldi from Hilton Head Health provide more instruction on how to begin a meditation practice. Highly recommend tuning into that. It'll be in a couple weeks. Going back to the eating example, if we feel like we've gone back into this chaotic survival mode eating pattern, then maybe it's starting with, okay, you know what? I'm going to prioritize eating a healthy breakfast every day. I'm just going to start there. I don't have to create gourmet meals every meal, but I'm going to work with some breakfast. Start small. If we're having a hard time sleeping, which is something that I'm hearing about from a lot of folks right now. Either it's hard to go to bed or we're popping up in the middle of the night. Then maybe it's okay, I'm going to really work on going to bed early. I'm not going to watch the news right before bed, especially now. We've got a lot in the news that's kind of depressing, very depressing. So maybe that's a subtle but impactful shift that you can make to set the stage for getting better sleep. We want to move the needle. We don't want to create huge monumental shifts. Again, there's a phrase I like. It's called inch by inch is a cinch. Yard by yard is hard. We want to start small. Build from there. It's like moving the needle. Don't expect this right now. We want to do this. Okay. So those are some ideas, but with the exploration, it's about coming up with your own and starting small and building from there. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you have something that you stepped away from, go back to that and start there first. This next one, and I'm about almost done here, but this next one is getting the support you need. The person who asked the question about the EAP, let me tell you, if we have loved ones that can be there and can be a support, fantastic. Some of us may not want to share our stuff with loved ones right now, or we feel like we don't want to share it with them because they've got their own stuff to deal with. There's no shame in seeking out support with a counselor. In fact, now more than ever, teletherapy is in, baby. It's much more accessible than it's ever been. So if your company has an EAP, use it. Experiment. See what you think. They actually are designed to help match you with a therapist that can be a support to you. I refer people to a website called psychologytoday.com, psychologytoday.com, where you can go there, click on find a therapist. And what's cool now is you don't have to be relegated just to your zip code. You can actually see a therapist in your state. And since a lot of us are at home doing remote counseling, you have more access to a wider range of therapists. No need to go it alone. So if you're feeling like, okay, I still don't know where to start after you start some of the self-exploration on what nourishes you, and you're kind of deer in the headlights, what that tells me is that you need more support. Do not need to go it alone, okay? Remember, when we feel better, we make better self-care choices. So we want to take those strides in which we can actually ease that pressure cooker, start small with our efforts. We want to be additive, not focus on what we feel like we shouldn't be doing, but what can I bring in? What can I bring in that helps to invite calm and nourishment and nurturing? This is not rocket science. It is actually quite simple, but I want to normalize it's not easy if we feel like we're in kind of a survival mode with everything. And it's not easy if prioritizing our own self-care and stepping into self-ness feels like a foreign concept, and we've got demands on life in our world pulling at us. It's going to require being creative. It's going to require taking time to ask the question and to tune in and listen to what the answers are for you. And I just want to normalize too that it's going to be one step at a time, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, trial and error, trial and success. Collect your data. What's working for you? What's not working for you? The key here is to begin. And so this particular talk is really aimed at helping you to begin to tune in and ask the questions. The rest of the series for this wellness series is going to dive deeper into those strategies to help support you and to provide other ways in which you can actually provide strategies that work for you and your preferences, your circumstances, your personality, your temperament. I do know this, that for a lot of us, our souls are crying out for self-nourishment right now. And so if we feel like it's gone by the wayside, we're not that person who's created that masterful garden, that slide that I showed you. If we're not thriving right now, then you're not alone. Little by little, we can actually begin to turn the tide with this. You can step into your own selfness. It's the elixir that's absolutely needed right now. And let me tell you, you are absolutely worth the effort. It is never too late to begin. Something is always, always better than nothing. And know that your efforts will not go unwarranted, and that will really help to create a difference. Any questions about all of that? I kind of fired a lot at you, but any questions that come up from that particular information?
Erin, I have a question. It's Connor. You talked a little bit about collecting data and,
Yeah.
trial and error, trial and success. Can you talk a little bit more about what that might look like or how that might be utilized by folks just to kind of track their progress?
Yeah, so this is where, again, the most common mindset that I'll hear about from folks is all or nothing. So they're all in or they're all out. They're doing it all good, or they feel like they're doing it all bad. And so really what it is in this self-exploration of trying to figure out, well, we want to be able to become our own authority around our health and wellness. And so often we need to kind of experiment to figure out what that is anymore. And in the experimenting, we're collecting our data around what's landing and working versus what isn't. Don't assume that you're going about it wrong if it's not working. I have a phrase that I use, it's called don't try harder, try different. So if something's not landing for you, stop, pivot, try different. And so that's the data that we need to collect as far as what feels like is working or not working. So that's a good question. That's just kind of an exploration. We want to listen, tune in, and kind of really ask the question on how it's landing or not, and then kind of pivot and do different if we need to.
We had actually just a hearing question. Someone was saying, what could you repeat when you said everyone's soul is crying out for what right now? They were wondering what you said.
Nourishment. Yeah, self-nourishment. I think our souls are crying out for a sense of relief, calming. You have to think about what's coming at us, right? We have our own personal stuff and our own personal world and our lives that's been going on. And in the last 6 months, we've had the pandemic. And then we have, certainly in this country, political strife and division and civil rights, understandably, a lot of that. We have a lot coming at us. So I think in this sense of all that's going on in our world, it's so important to be able to carve out this time for calming and centering, nourishing, creating that space for allowing ourselves to catch our breath in what feels like a rat race right now. So that's certainly what's popping up with a lot of clients right now, is just this need for nourishment and for nurturing our needs.
Does anyone have any other questions? Nancy wanted to make sure that we all know that we are worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for echoing that. Yeah. And I think that becomes too, especially if we're for anyone who's listening, who's in the caretaker role, there can be this sense of, again, the either me or you rather than me and you, that feeling worthy of the time and attention. And by worthiness, I think it has to do with this skill set of aligning with learning how to be a priority in our own lives. That becomes a skill set that we need to practice. So starting with those questions around, okay, what does that even look like? What does that mean? What do I want to do? What's interesting? What invites curiosity? That helps to begin to start that process of exploration. The rest of these talks will certainly help you to dive deeper into the strategies around that as well.
Erin, another question is a little bit COVID related, but Norma asked, how do we know the right protective measures for us during the pandemic when everybody does different things?
Good question. So in the question of how do we know what to do that's best for us, I think, if we all have, I call it the psychology of COVID, because we all have our own psychological response. We all have our own comfort levels around what feels best for us. I would say, this is going to be another question, right? Well, what is it that you need to feel safe and secure in your own health and well-being? And that might require having a conversation with certain loved ones or people in our world of, hey, you know what? when I'm with you, I just, so you know, I want the mask. And so, is that okay? And if not, then we'll have to kind of converse via virtual right now. So this is where it's about those boundaries and about lining up what feels safe and secure for me. What do I need to communicate to other people? Remember, discomfort over resentment. And I think in this place, since we all have a different comfort level with the pandemic and what we need to do to align with what feels good for us, it's about tuning into, well, what is that? And then also having a voice around that. And people will or will not show up. And I find that most people, if they're informed, they'll accommodate. But it's about, well, first of all, asking the question, well, what do I need? You know, that is a very good question to ask, along with what nourishes me. Well, what do I need to feel safe and secure? And then from there, voicing it to those that might need to hear that.
And I've got one last question for you that I think is quite interesting.
Okay.
It's from Anne, and it says, what happens when you have too much time to think of yourself? So it's kind of
yeah, well,
question. It might be
very good question.
Too inside your own head, or, you know, that.
Yeah, this is where there's been a lot of alone time. For some of us, it's been like more alone time than we could ever want. And when you think about the balance, right, of the social impact and our time with self, I've worked with a lot of folks where their time with self is just, you know, grown. And they're like, I just want to get out of my head. And this is where I would say in your day-to-day, it becomes, how do we engage our minds in those things? What invites curiosity? There's so many continuing education and learning opportunities online. Maybe there's more social things that we can do online, or maybe we can, then it becomes that, those creative solutions around how do you spend your day-to-day? Do you enjoy what you're doing day-to-day? Or is it this rumination? I find a lot of anxiety getting kicked in because we're ruminating on the what if, the fears, the uncertainty, the sense of I feel more alone in this. And then it's like, okay, yep, that's here. This is life right now. And this is what I can do about it. This is what I can do today to kind of funnel my energy and my attention into some continuing education, some reaching out to a friend, to getting into those interests and activities that I've kind of keep putting off on the back burner. So it becomes this, and it really is not easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's really about how to go, okay, you know what? How do I make lemonade out of lemons right now? And how do I tune into actually, you know, enjoying my own company a little bit more? And that becomes, again, that question of what nourishes me. What am I curious about? What am I passionate about? And that becomes the experimenting with those certain activities and ways in which to engage the brain in different ways.
Erin, I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody here at Kensington Park. It was a great session, and thank you to everybody who attended. We hope that you can join us next Wednesday, same time. Erin, did you want to say a little bit more about next week's session, since you'll be leading?
Yes, it's really about how to shift from surviving to thriving. So with health psychology, you know, what it is when we talk about the influences on our choices, and we find ourselves in survival mode, and some of us are firmly in that place, right? I'm going to dive into real strategies on how to actually unhook from survival mode and hook into thriving. I'm going to talk about those ways in which we go to self-soothing that help in the moment. So we're going to talk about the false fixes, right? And I work a lot with emotional eating and emotional drinking, and you know, those places that we go to self-soothe. How to shift and redirect our attention into those ways in which we can truly hook into what feels nourishing and nurturing. So we're going to dive into some more of those tactical strategies on how to do just that.
Thank you so much, and we hope you have a great week. Be safe, everybody, and we will see you next Wednesday. Let me know if you have questions. Bye-bye, everybody.